TIFU, by accidentally starting a small fire in my kitchen and nearly burning down my apartment while trying to make a simple grilled cheese sandwich. It all started last Saturday afternoon. I had just gotten back from a long, exhausting week of work and was craving something comforting. My brain didn't want anything fancy, just a classic grilled cheese sandwich. I'm an adult, after all, I've made this 100 times. I couldn't screw this up, right? Right. I pulled out a couple of slices of bread, a hunk of cheddar cheese, and butter from the fridge. It was all I needed. I set up my station on the counter, grabbed the skillet, and put it on the stove. This was going to be easy. I had a bit of a headache from the previous night's party, but I convinced myself that I didn't need to take it easy. I was hungry, and I was going to eat. After spreading a thick layer of butter on the bread, I carefully placed a slice of cheese between the 2 slices of bread. Simple, right? I turned on the stove and put the skillet on medium heat. Now, here's where things went wrong. I usually put the heat on medium-high for grilled cheese because I like it crispy. But for some reason, I didn't think about it much and just went ahead and placed the sandwich in the skillet. I sat down to relax for a second. Big mistake. I didn't set a timer or anything. I thought, oh, I'll just flip it when I smell it. Rookie mistake. I was scrolling through my phone, completely zoning out when suddenly, I smelled something burning. I shot up from the couch, and as soon as I walked into the kitchen, I saw smoke. Thick smoke. Not just a little puff either, this was the kind of smoke that makes you wonder if you need to call 911. I rushed to the stove, my heart pounding in my chest. The sandwich was black, and the whole skillet was filled with smoke. The bread was practically on fire. A few flames were licking the sides of the pan. I panicked. I immediately grabbed the handle of the skillet, but then froze. I knew I shouldn't carry a hot pan with fire in it. So, like an idiot, I did the one thing that no one should ever do in a situation like this. I grabbed a dish towel to pick up the skillet. It's worth mentioning that I had recently washed my dish towels, so they were a bit damp. This wasn't a great move, but I didn't think it would matter much. As soon as the towel touched the pan's hot handle, I felt the burning heat shoot up my arm. It was like the world had slowed down for a split second. I dropped the towel, and it caught on fire. Now, I had a towel on fire in my hand. I panicked harder. I frantically flung the towel on the counter, and it quickly caught fire. My kitchen was now filled with smoke and flames, and I had no idea what to do. I remember my brain screaming at me, "What the hell are you doing? This is how fires start." I bolted to grab the fire extinguisher I kept under the sink, but as soon as I opened the cabinet, I realized with horror that I had never actually replaced it after it expired last year. I just stared at the empty space where the fire extinguisher should have been, my brain working in overdrive. It was like I was in a bad dream. I grabbed a glass of water, but then I remembered, never throw water on a grease fire. It only makes it worse. The panic began to rise, and I could feel my heart beating in my throat. I was thinking of calling 911, but I wasn't sure if the fire was big enough to warrant that. It was a classic case of not knowing how bad the situation really was. My next move was probably one of the dumbest things I've ever done. I rushed to the sink, grabbed a handful of wet paper towels, and tried to smother the fire on the counter where the towel was burning. As I did, I could feel the heat rising. It wasn't working. The fire was only getting worse, and I was freaking out. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I sprinted out of the apartment and ran to the building's fire exit. I dialed 911, hands shaking as I told the operator that I might have started a fire in my apartment. I was still standing on the street when I heard the sirens coming closer. At that moment, I was sure my apartment was about to go up in flames. The fire trucks arrived within minutes, and I could feel the heat of the engines radiating through the street. A couple of firefighters rushed into the building while I stood there like an idiot, feeling completely useless. I could barely even answer their questions, still in a state of shock. About 15 minutes later, the firefighters came back out of the building and gave me the all clear. The fire had been contained before it spread too much, but my kitchen was a disaster. They told me that if I had waited just a few more minutes, I might not have been so lucky. I stood there, feeling like an absolute idiot. Not only had I nearly burned down my apartment, but I'd also called the fire department over a dumb grilled cheese. When I went back inside, I saw that the kitchen was a mess of charred bread and blackened countertops. The smell of burnt food and smoke was lingering everywhere. There were scorch marks on the ceiling, and even the walls had been singed. My apartment didn't burn down, but it was definitely worse than I had anticipated. I had to spend the next few days cleaning, airing the place out, and replacing the fire extinguisher I never should have let expire in the first place. I learned several things that day. 1. I am terrible under pressure. 2. Never get distracted while cooking. 3. Always keep your fire extinguisher up to date. 4. I should probably stick to making simple salads from now on. But the most important lesson I learned that day was that I will never, ever underestimate the simple power of a grilled cheese sandwich again. It's a deceptively dangerous meal when you're not paying attention. Needless to say, I didn't touch a grilled cheese for a long time after that. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. So, I've been living in this small apartment for about a year now. It's nothing fancy, but it's cozy enough, and the rent is affordable for my city. I'm a single guy, working from home in a 9-to-5 job. I'm not exactly the most social person, so it's mostly just me and my Netflix account. My apartment is on the second floor of a 4-story building, and it has a balcony that overlooks the parking lot. There's this one neighbor, let's call him Dave, who lives a couple of doors down. We've exchanged a few awkward hellos in the hallway, but nothing more. He's older, probably in his late 40s, and seems to be kind of a loner too. I've never had much reason to interact with him. Now, for some reason, this story is about Dave and something that happened between us that I can't quite explain. I swear, this is the most awkward and messed up situation I've found myself in a while. A few weeks ago, I noticed a small package sitting outside my door. It wasn't for me, but it was addressed to a D. Wilson. I was confused because there was no D. Wilson in the building. At least, I didn't know of anyone by that name. I looked around and didn't see any other packages nearby. So, I just shrugged it off and went about my day. A few days later, the package was still there. I decided to knock on Dave's door to see if it was for him. I mean, his last name is Wilson, so it wasn't a huge stretch to think it could be his. I knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. I waited some more. Still nothing. I thought that was weird, but whatever. I picked up the package, figuring I'd just leave it in front of his door. He'd get it eventually. Now, here's where things start to get weird. That night, I went to bed, and everything seemed normal. I woke up the next morning to an absolute disaster. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone like I usually do when I heard a loud thud at the door. Then another thud. And another. It sounded like someone was slamming into the door, like they were trying to break in. My heart was racing. I thought I was about to be robbed, or worse. But then the banging stopped. I waited for a few minutes, trying to calm down, but there was no sound. I crept out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat, just in case, and made my way to the door. I peered through the peephole and didn't see anyone. I opened the door cautiously and found nothing but the package I had left in front of Dave's door. But the package was now halfway down the hallway. It looked like someone had kicked it down the hall. I felt a chill run down my spine. I figured it was just some kids messing around, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the next couple of days, strange things started happening. I'd be at my desk working when I'd hear light footsteps outside my door. I'd get up, open the door, and find no one there. Sometimes I'd hear quiet voices, like whispers, but when I'd go out into the hallway, there would be nothing but silence. But the weirdest part was what happened next. One afternoon, I decided to grab a quick nap. I set my alarm for 30 minutes and lay down on the couch. As soon as I closed my eyes, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a regular knock, though. It was rhythmic. Like someone was tapping in a pattern, almost like Morse code. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just my brain playing tricks on me. But then it happened again. Knock. 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 Pause. Knock. 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 I sat up, feeling my stomach twist into knots. My first instinct was to check the peephole. When I looked through it, I saw Dave standing there. He was staring straight at the door, not moving, not even blinking. I could see him clearly, but he didn't seem to notice me peering through the peephole. He just stood there, perfectly still, for a long, uncomfortable moment. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was in a horror movie. I wanted to open the door and ask if everything was okay, but something inside me told me not to. I don't know what it was, but I had this overwhelming feeling that whatever was going on with Dave, it wasn't normal. After what felt like forever, he finally turned and walked away. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written on a piece of scrap paper in barely legible handwriting. It read, *, it's not for you. Don't touch it. *, I froze. I didn't know what to make of it. The note was addressed to me, but I couldn't figure out what it meant. What wasn't for me? And what was I not supposed to touch? That night, I stayed up late, too anxious to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard the soft shuffle of feet in the hallway again. I peeked through the peephole and saw Dave standing there, right outside my door, just staring at it. Not knocking. Not moving. Just standing there like he was waiting for something. I was beyond freaked out at this point. I texted a friend of mine, telling them what had been happening. They said I should call the building management, but honestly, I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to get involved with whatever was going on with Dave. I just wanted to be left alone. The next morning, I went to work like usual. When I came home, the package was back in front of my door. I didn't touch it. I left it there, thinking that maybe it was some sort of weird message or test or something. I had no idea. And then it got even stranger. 2 days ago, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, there was no one there, but the package was gone. In its place was a fresh note. This one was even more cryptic, * you should have listened. * that was when I realized Dave had been leaving these notes. But why? And what was in the package? I still don't know, but I have a feeling that whatever is going on, it's only going to get worse. So now, I'm sitting here, unsure what to do next. I haven't seen Dave around lately, but I'm not sure if I should try talking to him or just leave well enough alone. I guess I'll just keep my distance and hope that whatever this is, it blows over soon. I don't know if this story is done yet, but I'll keep you all updated if anything else happens. Until then, I'm just hoping I can get through the next few days without losing my mind. TIFU by going on a Tinder date that ended up being way more than I expected. So, this all started a few weeks ago when I matched with a girl named Emily on Tinder. Her profile was pretty typical of cute pics, a few clever jokes, and a bio that mentioned how she loved hiking, cooking, and cats. I thought she seemed interesting, so I swiped right and we started talking. The conversation flowed pretty easily. She asked me about my job, and I told her I worked in marketing. She asked me if I liked movies, and I told her I was a huge fan of horror films. At one point, I mentioned I was into running, and she said she used to run marathons. Now, I should have seen the red flags early on. I know this now. But at the time, everything seemed fine. She was smart, funny, and seemed to have a lot in common with me. After a couple of days of texting back and forth, we agreed to meet up. We decided on a casual coffee date, you know, the usual first date stuff. The day of the date arrived, and I was feeling a bit nervous but excited. I dressed in a nice shirt, some jeans, and sneakers, nothing too fancy, but I wanted to look presentable. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop at 3 p.m. I showed up early, sat down, and tried to calm my nerves by scrolling through my phone. A few minutes passed, and I saw Emily walk in. She was even more beautiful than her pictures. I stood up to greet her, and we exchanged a hug. She smiled and said, "You look just like your photos," and I felt a little relief. We sat down and started chatting. We talked about movies, running, and how her job as a graphic designer was pretty demanding but rewarding. Everything seemed to be going well. I felt comfortable, and we had some good laughs. But then, about 30 minutes into the conversation, she said something that threw me off. "I'm so glad we're finally doing this," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "I've been looking forward to it all week. You know, my friends have been telling me I should really get back out there. I didn't think much of it at the time. People talk about their friends all the time." But then, she dropped the bomb. "Yeah, I've been divorced for a few months now. It was a really tough breakup, but I'm trying to put myself out there again." I was a bit taken aback. I hadn't expected her to be divorced. I mean, it wasn't a deal breaker or anything, but I was definitely surprised. I mean, I hadn't seen anything in her profile about being married, let alone divorced. I felt bad for her, of course. Divorce is never easy. "Well, I'm sorry to hear that," I said, trying to be empathetic. "But I think it's great that you're getting back into dating. It's good to keep putting yourself out there." She smiled, clearly appreciative of the support. But then, just as I was starting to relax again, she hit me with another one. "I'm also a little bit, well, I guess you could say I'm a work in progress. I've been doing therapy for a while now to work through some of my issues." At this point, I was kind of confused. This was turning into a lot more than I had bargained for on a casual coffee date. But, again, I tried to stay supportive. I've never been the type to judge anyone for going to therapy. I think it's healthy to get help when you need it. "Hey, that's great. Therapy is important," I said. "I think everyone has something they can work on." She nodded, and then, she did something I wasn't prepared for. She leaned in a little closer and whispered, "I'm just going to say it, I'm still not fully over my ex. I mean, we were together for 8 years. That's a lot of history." At this point, I was genuinely wondering what I had gotten myself into. I mean, we were still in the early stages of a first date. I hadn't expected to get the full emotional backstory right out of the gate. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "Well, I'm sure things will get better over time. You've got a lot going for you, I'm sure you'll meet someone amazing." She smiled again, and I thought maybe we had turned a corner. But nope. Emily wasn't done. "You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this, huh?" she said with a little laugh, but it wasn't a cheerful laugh. It was more of a nervous, strained one. "Yeah, honestly, I'm a little confused," I admitted, trying to be gentle about it. "I wasn't expecting all of this on a first date." She nodded seriously. "I totally get it. I've just been in some really intense situations lately. Like, I had this whole thing where my ex's new girlfriend tried to fight me. It was a whole ordeal." At this point, I wasn't sure if I was on a date or a therapy session. But before I could say anything else, Emily dropped another one on me. "So, I've also been, struggling with some anger issues," she said, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I know it sounds weird, but I've been really angry at a lot of people. I mean, a lot. I get these outbursts sometimes, and it's something I'm working on, but my brain was starting to overload." I was starting to think this was no longer just a first date. This was an emotional intervention. I didn't know if I was the guy who was supposed to be there for her or the guy who was supposed to run for the hills. The next few minutes were a blur. She kept talking, but I couldn't really absorb what she was saying. She mentioned her ex again, how they still had some unresolved issues, and how she hadn't been able to let go of a lot of things. It was like every time I thought I had a grip on the situation, she dropped a new bombshell. I'll admit, I tried to be a good listener. I did. But around the 90-minute mark, I was running out of patience. My brain just couldn't keep up with all the emotional baggage. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was that I wasn't prepared to be someone's emotional therapist on a first date. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked at me earnestly. I'm so glad we could talk about all of this. It's been really helpful to get it off my chest. At this point, I was mentally exhausted. I felt like I had been through an emotional roller coaster. I tried to smile, but honestly, all I could think was, what the hell just happened? Well, I said, standing up, I'm glad you felt comfortable talking about all that. But, I think we might be better off as just friends. I mean, this was a lot for a first date, don't you think? Emily's face dropped for a second, but then she nodded. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, I probably should have mentioned some of this earlier. I just needed to get it out. I paid for the coffee, we said our awkward goodbyes, and I walked out of the coffee shop feeling like I had just been through a therapy session I never signed up for. Lesson learned, sometimes a coffee date is just a coffee date. And sometimes it turns into an emotional roller coaster that leaves you wondering if you should have brought a therapist with you. But hey, at least I didn't have to deal with the anger issues. TIFU by trying to fix a simple plumbing issue and flooding my entire apartment building. I've never been a handy person. Growing up, I was the kid who got distracted while trying to build a Lego set, and I still can't figure out how to put together IKEA furniture without excessive swearing. But like many people, I've always believed that the best way to learn is by doing. That's probably the first mistake I made, thinking I could fix a plumbing issue myself. It all started last weekend when I noticed a slow drip coming from the bathroom sink. I'm not the type to call in a professional unless absolutely necessary, and since it was just a small leak, I figured I could handle it. After all, how complicated could a leaky faucet be? I'd seen enough DIY plumbing videos on YouTube to feel confident. What could possibly go wrong? So, I made a quick trip to the local hardware store, where I bought some basic plumbing tools, a pipe wrench, a replacement washer, and some plumber's tape, because, of course, the videos told me I would need it. Armed with my new tools, I headed back home, ready to conquer this tiny issue. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. I turned off the water supply, unscrewed the faucet, and replaced the washer like the videos showed me. I even used the plumber's tape to seal the connection properly. I felt like a DIY hero. Sure, there were a few moments when I dropped a wrench or had to Google what a compression fitting was, but I powered through. After reassembling the faucet, I turned the water back on, stood back, and admired my work. And that's when things went south. The moment the water started flowing, I heard a strange gurgling sound from the pipes. I figured it was just air getting trapped or something, no big deal. But then, I noticed water starting to pool around the base of the sink. At first, it was just a small puddle, so I thought, okay, maybe I didn't tighten something enough. But when I bent down to take a closer look, I saw water pouring out from under the sink, fast. I immediately turned off the water supply again, but it was too late. The water didn't stop. It kept flowing, pouring out like some kind of broken dam, running down the pipes and spilling over onto the floor. I scrambled to grab towels and try to contain the flood, but it wasn't enough. The floor was now completely soaked, and the water was rapidly spreading into the hallway. In a panic, I turned the water supply off at the main valve, but still, the damage had been done. Now, I was in full-blown crisis mode. The water had started seeping into the adjoining rooms, and I could hear it dripping through the walls. My mind was racing. What the hell did I do? How was I supposed to fix this? My first thought was to call my landlord, but of course, it was late Saturday evening, and I had no idea when they'd be available. Desperation set in, and I began texting my neighbors, trying to figure out who might have experience with plumbing. No one responded. In the meantime, the water continued to spread. It was now dripping down the stairs into the lobby of my apartment building. People were starting to notice. I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone, Googled the plumbing company closest to me, and called them. They informed me that they could send someone over in a few hours. A few hours? The damage was escalating by the minute. I needed help now. Then, a thought struck me like a lightning bolt. My friend Greg. He's the kind of guy who can fix anything, car engines, leaky roofs, broken bikes, you name it. I pulled up his number and dialed him without hesitation. Greg, I exclaimed as soon as he picked up. I need your help. I've flooded my apartment. I could practically hear him raise an eyebrow on the other end of the line. What do you mean, flooded? Like, a little leak or a flood? Like, a flood, I said. I need you to come over, like, now. After a brief pause, Greg sighed and told me he'd be over in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, Greg showed up, looking as unflustered as ever, as though he was about to walk into a dinner party instead of a disaster zone. He assessed the situation with a calm that made me wonder if I should be questioning my life choices. Well, he said after a quick look around, this is definitely something. He knelt down by the sink and twisted a few knobs. The water had mostly stopped, but the damage was extensive. The floor was soaked, the ceiling below had a noticeable drip, and there was a smell of mildew starting to fill the air. He turned to me. What the hell did you do? I followed the video. I swear. I said, feeling defensive. I just replaced the washer and Greg interrupted me with a smile. You know what you probably didn't do? Turn off the water supply properly before you messed with the faucet. That's the most common mistake people make. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. Great, I muttered. So now what? Now, Greg said, standing up and looking at the damage, I'll fix it. But first, you need to call your landlord. This is beyond what you can handle on your own. It took another hour for my landlord to arrive. By that point, Greg had already gotten the water completely turned off and had begun assessing the damage. We had a team of professionals out to fix the plumbing later that night, but not before the entire building smelled like a wet dog and half the tenants had filed complaints. In the end, the issue was fixed. But I was left with a hefty bill and a reputation in the building as the guy who flooded the entire apartment complex. My neighbors still make jokes about it, and every time I pass Greg in the hallway, he gives me a look like he's about to sell me a life jacket. Lesson learned, some things are better left to the professionals, especially when it comes to plumbing. I think I'll stick to changing light bulbs from now on. TLDR, tried to fix a simple leak, didn't properly turn off the water, flooded my apartment and half the building. Had to call a friend and my landlord to fix everything, and now I'm known as the guy who flooded the building. TIFU by accidentally setting my kitchen on fire while trying to impress my friends with my cooking skills. It all started about 2 weeks ago when my best friend, Sarah, suggested we have a dinner party. We both love cooking, but I'd always been the one to take the back seat. Sarah is a much more experienced chef, so when she brought up the idea of hosting a dinner, I figured I'd finally step up and show everyone that I could cook too. I had this grand vision in my head of impressing the entire group with my cooking abilities, and I was determined to make it happen. I decided on making a homemade lasagna. Not just any lasagna, but a chef's special lasagna, something that would blow everyone's mind. I spent hours researching recipes online, watching tutorial videos, and reading reviews to make sure I had the perfect ingredients and technique. I even bought all the expensive, high-quality cheeses and meats, because I figured if I was going to do this, I had to go all in. The day of the dinner party came, and I was feeling confident. My kitchen was stocked, the recipe was memorized, and the ingredients were laid out like a professional chef's workstation. Sarah arrived early to help with some of the preparations, but I was determined to handle most of the cooking myself. After all, this was my big moment. I wanted to prove I could pull this off without relying on anyone else. Things started off well enough. I sautéed the onions and garlic, browned the meat, and layered everything in the casserole dish with perfect precision. The lasagna was coming together beautifully. The kitchen was filled with the delicious aroma of Italian herbs and spices, and I could practically hear the applause in my head as I imagined everyone at the dinner table. But then, I hit a snag. The lasagna recipe I had found online called for baking it at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for about an hour, which seemed simple enough. But as I placed the lasagna in the oven and set the timer, I started to get cocky. I wanted to impress my friends, so I decided to whip up a dessert to go along with the meal. I had no business trying to make dessert in the midst of my first major cooking attempt, but I figured it would be the perfect way to top off the evening. I grabbed a chocolate soufflé recipe from my phone and quickly got to work on it. As I started prepping the chocolate and whipping the egg whites, I became more and more distracted. I kept glancing over at the oven, thinking the lasagna must be done soon, but I was so focused on the soufflé that I lost track of time. I should have set a timer for the dessert too, but I was too busy multitasking. That was my first mistake. About 40 minutes into the lasagna's cooking time, the faint smell of smoke reached my nose. I froze. Smoke? In my kitchen? No, it couldn't be. I ran over to the oven, opened the door, and was immediately hit with a thick cloud of smoke. My heart dropped into my stomach as I saw flames licking the edges of my lasagna dish. Apparently, I had made the rookie mistake of not checking on the lasagna frequently enough. As the heat built up in the oven, some of the cheese and sauce had begun to overflow from the dish and drip onto the oven's heating element. That's when the fire started. I panicked. The lasagna was on fire. I slammed the oven door shut, hoping that would contain the flames. But that only made things worse. The fire raged inside, and within seconds, I could hear the sound of crackling as the cheese burned even more intensely. I had to act fast. In my panic, I grabbed the nearest thing to me, which was a large oven mitt, and opened the oven door again. I grabbed the lasagna dish, intending to pull it out and extinguish the flames. But as I pulled the dish out of the oven, something went horribly wrong. The edge of the dish caught on the oven rack, causing the entire thing to tilt. The lasagna, on fire, spilled out onto the floor, setting the kitchen carpet ablaze. The fire spread quickly, and now I had not just a flaming lasagna in my oven but an actual fire on my kitchen floor. In a state of complete panic, I ran to the sink, filled a pot with water, and poured it onto the flames on the floor. Big mistake. The water caused the hot oil to splatter and spread the fire even further. My kitchen was quickly turning into an inferno. At this point, I realized I wasn't going to be able to handle this on my own. I grabbed my phone, called 911, and screamed, "There's a fire in my kitchen." The dispatcher on the other end was calm, thankfully, and gave me instructions to get out of the house. I didn't need much encouragement. I bolted out of the house, screaming for Sarah, who had been in the living room, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding in the kitchen. We both stood outside, watching as thick black smoke poured from the kitchen window. The fire department arrived within minutes, and firefighters rushed into the house. I could only stand there, shaking, as they battled the fire. After what felt like an eternity, they managed to get the fire under control and eventually extinguished it. The damage was done, though. The kitchen was completely ruined. The floor was scorched, the walls were blackened with smoke, and the ceiling had smoke damage. The fire didn't spread to the rest of the house, thankfully, but the damage to the kitchen was severe. The lasagna, of course, was a charred disaster. The dinner party I had been so excited about was now a distant memory, replaced with the smell of burnt food and the bitter taste of failure. My friends were sympathetic, but I could tell they were all secretly relieved that they didn't have to eat my cooking. Sarah was a trooper, though, and we all ended up at a local pizza place, trying to salvage some sort of fun from the evening. As for me, I've learned 2 things. 1, don't try to impress people by cooking above your skill level, and 2, fire extinguishers exist for a reason. In the aftermath, I've had to deal with insurance claims, renovations, and the fact that I can no longer even look at lasagna without breaking into a cold sweat. So, yeah. That's how I nearly burned down my kitchen trying to impress my friends with a meal. October 10th would not recommend. TIFU by accidentally sending a very personal message to my entire work group. I was sitting at my desk, mindlessly scrolling through my phone after a particularly grueling meeting. The whole week had been a mess, too many deadlines, too many tasks, and way too many emails to respond to. As I looked through my social media feed, I noticed that one of my friends had posted something that gave me a great idea for a meme. My friend's post was about how their work was treating them badly, so I thought, hey, I can make a funny comment about how my work is also a circus. I quickly opened up my phone's messenger app and typed out a playful message. It read, "This place is a goddamn circus, lol. I swear, half the time I feel like I'm juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle." I thought it was pretty funny, and so I decided to send it to my friend as a private message. But then, in my half-distracted state, I made a terrible mistake. Instead of sending the message to my friend, I mistakenly selected the company-wide Slack group. This wasn't just any Slack group either, this was the main communication channel for the entire company, with hundreds of employees from all departments, including top-level executives and HR. As soon as I hit send, I froze. The little notification popped up in the corner of my screen, message sent to #company-wide chat. My heart immediately dropped to my stomach. It was too late. The message was already out there. For a split second, I thought about just ignoring it. Maybe everyone would think it was some sort of harmless joke, right? But the reality hit hard. This wasn't just some casual workplace banter. It was a message filled with sarcasm about how chaotic and dysfunctional our company seemed sometimes. And the worst part was that it was going straight to the eyes of everyone, superiors included. I stared at my screen, wondering what I could possibly do to undo this disaster. Should I try to delete the message? No. Slack doesn't let you delete messages once they've been sent to a group, especially a company-wide one. Panic started to settle in as I read through the responses that were already flooding in. The first reply was from Jason, one of the senior engineers in the company. He's the kind of guy who's always got a dry sense of humor, but I could already tell he was about to have fun with this. The message read, "Flaming swords?" Or just juggling flaming emails and meetings, followed by a laughing emoji. Great, I thought. Jason's the least of my worries. But then, my worst fear came true. The HR director, Sharon, had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. That was when I realized that this was going to be a bigger issue than just my embarrassing mistake. HR had just acknowledged that the message had reached the higher-ups, and now it was being read by people who could potentially use it against me in a performance review or worse, fire me. I tried to compose myself and quickly typed a follow-up message in the group, trying to explain it away as a simple mistake. Sorry, guys. That was meant to be a private message to a friend, didn't mean to offend anyone. It was just a joke. There was a long pause. My screen was filled with more messages, but none of them were comforting. Then, after what felt like an eternity, another message popped up, this time from our CEO, who was notorious for being a stickler about professionalism. Let's remember to keep things professional in this chat, he wrote. If anyone needs to vent or joke about the circus, let's keep it in more appropriate channels. I could feel the color draining from my face. My eyes quickly glanced at my phone, and I read the message over and over again, trying to understand the tone. Was he angry? Disappointed? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for sure: this was a corporate disaster in the making. I immediately started typing another apology. I apologize again. I didn't mean to make light of the company. I respect everyone here and love my job. I just got a little carried away. But before I could send it, a new message appeared from Rachel, a manager I worked with closely on several projects. She had always been friendly but could be a bit too enthusiastic about team-building exercises. Her message read, "LOL, no worries, I think we all feel like that sometimes. It's tough juggling all the flaming swords." I couldn't tell if she was trying to make me feel better or if she was sarcastically agreeing with my assessment of the company. Either way, it made me feel even more uncomfortable. Was she throwing me under the bus, or was she genuinely trying to cover for me? Then came the dreaded response I had been waiting for. A message from Sharon, the HR director, who had been eerily quiet until now. It simply read, "Let's have a chat when you have a moment," smiley face, and there it was. I had a sinking feeling in my chest. I knew that chat was not going to be pleasant. I quickly tried to prepare myself for the worst. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment, and sent a quick apology to the Slack group. "Sorry again, everyone. Didn't mean to cause any trouble. I'll be more careful next time." The rest of the afternoon was a blur. My heart raced as I waited for the inevitable meeting with HR. I tried to focus on my tasks, but all I could think about was the conversation that awaited me. Was I going to get written up? Would this affect my future at the company? Was I about to be the subject of some all-staff email about professionalism? As the clock ticked closer to the end of the day, Sharon sent me a private message, "Can you meet me in my office in 10 minutes? I stood up and walked to her office, feeling like I was walking to my own execution. When I got there, Sharon greeted me with a smile that I couldn't quite interpret. She asked me to sit down, and for the next 20 minutes, we talked about how important it was to maintain professionalism in communication, especially when it came to company-wide channels. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't exactly pleased either. It felt like she was walking a fine line between offering me a slap on the wrist and gently reminding me of the company's values. It wasn't the worst conversation I could have had, but it certainly wasn't the most comfortable. In the end, she told me that there wouldn't be any official punishment, but that I should be more mindful in the future. I nodded and thanked her for her understanding, though I knew I'd never live this down. The rest of the week passed by with a few awkward interactions. Jason kept sending me memes about juggling flaming swords, and Rachel kept checking in on how I was doing. Eventually, the incident faded into the background, but it wasn't something I'd ever forget. Lesson learned: double-check your messages before hitting send, especially when it involves your company's Slack group. The last thing you want is to turn your workplace into a circus, for the wrong reasons. TIFU by accidentally sending my boss a very inappropriate meme, and now I'm being asked for a meeting. So, here's the thing. I'm an average 29-year-old guy with a pretty boring office job at a small tech company. Nothing extraordinary, but I've been working from home for the past few months, so I've gotten a little too comfortable. The other day, I was scrolling through social media while on my lunch break, mindlessly checking out memes like any other 20-something adult with access to a Wi-Fi connection. As I was laughing at some absurd meme involving a poorly drawn dog trying to deliver a pizza, I realized I had to get back to work. I opened my email to send a report, and I saw an email from my boss, Tina, sitting in my inbox. She's a no-nonsense, straight-to-the-point kind of person, so I've always respected her professionalism. But for whatever reason, I had just spent the last 30 minutes reading jokes about pizza delivery dogs, and my brain was in that weird, I'm working but not really working mode. I was about to hit reply when I noticed a notification from Slack, my company's communication tool, pop up on my screen. My coworker, Dave, had sent me a message. We'd been trading funny memes all week because things at work had been a little slow, and it was our way of keeping things lighthearted. Dave sent me a meme that I thought was absolutely hilarious. It was a picture of a man wearing a business suit, holding a banana like a phone, and the caption said, when you try to sound professional on a Zoom call but your banana's the only thing you can focus on. It made me laugh so hard that I thought, I'm going to send this to Tina, just to see if she thinks it's funny. Now, I know what you're thinking, why on earth would you send a meme to your boss, especially one as professional as Tina? But listen, I thought it was harmless. I figured if it made me laugh, maybe it would make her chuckle too. Plus, I had no idea that I was about to make one of the biggest mistakes of my life. Here's where it gets sticky. I meant to reply to Dave with a quick laugh and then move on with my day. But in my distracted, overconfident state, I didn't notice that Tina had just sent me a follow-up email asking for my report. My brain was on autopilot. Instead of replying to Dave, I accidentally forwarded the meme to Tina. I didn't even realize what had happened until Tina replied a minute later. Her message was short and cold, "We need to have a meeting." My heart dropped. I immediately opened the email thread again to check, and there it was. The forwarded meme, sitting innocently in her inbox, mocking the concept of professionalism in the workplace. The fact that I had sent it to her, of all people, was enough to make my skin crawl. I quickly went into damage control mode and sent a follow-up email, apologizing profusely for the accidental forward. I tried to explain that I was simply trying to reply to Dave, and it was a mistake. But Tina didn't buy it. The next day, I was walking into the virtual meeting with dread. I didn't know what to expect, but I had a sinking feeling that I was about to be grilled like a burger on a summer day. The meeting started, and Tina immediately opened with, "Let's address the elephant in the room." She didn't even crack a smile. She just stared at the screen as if she were trying to read my soul. I, on the other hand, was doing everything in my power to keep my cool. I nodded, trying to look like someone who had his life together. "Yes, absolutely. I apologize for that. It was a mistake," I said, my voice cracking in the process. "I'm sure it was," Tina said, deadpan. "But why would you think sending that meme was appropriate?" She said meme like it was a four-letter word, like I'd sent her something offensive. I didn't think it was inappropriate. It was just supposed to be a joke, I tried to explain. Tina stared at me, her face unreadable. For a moment, there was a heavy silence, and I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. Then, finally, she said, "Look, I'm not upset about the meme. I'm upset about the lack of judgment. If I had to guess, I'd say you're probably a great employee, but I need to know that you can represent this company with the same level of professionalism that you bring to your work." Now, this wasn't the harshest feedback I'd ever gotten, but it still stung. I had thought I was just sharing a funny moment, but apparently, I'd missed the mark completely. Tina then went on to explain that humor is subjective, and while she didn't mind the occasional lightheartedness, there were lines that shouldn't be crossed in a professional setting. After what felt like an eternity, Tina wrapped up the meeting. "I'll give you a pass this time, but consider this a learning moment. Going forward, let's keep things appropriate." She smiled then, just a little, and I knew I had dodged a bullet. "And please, don't send me any more memes. Not unless it's about something work-related." I agreed, practically choking on my words. "Of course, absolutely. Thank you for understanding." That was the end of it. For now. But here's the kicker. Ever since that meeting, Tina has been strangely nice to me. Like, over-the-top nice. Every time she emails or Slack messages me, it's all, "Hey, how's your day going, and I hope you're enjoying the weather." It's like I'm now the subject of her personal HR experiment. I'm starting to think she's secretly taking notes on my every move, just waiting for me to slip up again. And to top it off, Dave? He won't stop laughing about it. He keeps calling me Meme King in our group chats, and I can't escape it. I mean, I get it, it's funny, but I'm just not sure if I'm ever going to live this down. So, yeah. That's how I accidentally sent a meme to my boss and almost got fired. If there's one lesson I've learned from all of this, it's never, ever send a meme to your boss. Especially not one that involves a banana phone. TLDR, sent a meme to my boss by accident, got called into a meeting, and learned the hard way that memes and professionalism don't mix. Now my boss is acting weirdly nice, and I can't escape the meme jokes. I have a pretty basic job as a customer service representative at a call center. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills and lets me put a roof over my head. It's not the worst job in the world, but it's not exactly a dream either. A lot of people have bad days at work, but I had a day that was downright legendary in how horrifically embarrassing it became. It all started with what I thought was going to be a simple, routine call. The kind I've taken thousands of times before. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning of a series of unfortunate events that would completely derail my day. So, I was sitting at my desk, headset on, ready to take the next call. It was around 2:30 p.m., and the call volume had been steady all day. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened so far, and I was feeling pretty confident that this was going to be another uneventful shift. Then, I answered a call from a customer who immediately sounded irritated. "Hello, this is Jason, how can I help you today?" I said, trying to sound as friendly and approachable as possible. "I need help with my account," the customer snapped. "I'm really not happy with the way things are going, and I've already talked to 3 people about this, so if you don't know what you're doing, I'm hanging up and calling back." Got it? I froze for a second, trying to process what he had just said. It wasn't the best way to start a conversation, but I took a deep breath and reminded myself that he was just frustrated. I've had worse. I've dealt with customers who were much angrier, so this was manageable. Got it. I'll do my best to help you, sir. What seems to be the issue? There was a long pause, and then he launched into a rambling tirade about his account being charged incorrectly and how he had been promised a refund, but no one had followed through. I clicked through the screens on my computer, trying to pull up his account information while listening to him vent. As he ranted, I started typing notes in his account, trying to make sense of the situation. After a couple of minutes of listening to his complaints, I finally had the info I needed. I found a few issues with the account, and I was pretty sure I could help resolve it. I was about to speak up when something strange happened. There was a weird, high-pitched noise coming from my headset. It was loud and sudden, and it startled me so much that I jumped. It was like a loud, screeching feedback sound, and it didn't stop. Sir? Are you hearing that noise?" I asked, hoping it was something on his end. There was a brief silence on the line before he responded. "Yeah, I hear it. What the hell is that? Is that coming from you?" I looked around the office, confused. The noise was definitely coming from my headset, but I couldn't figure out what had caused it. I started pressing the buttons on my headset, trying to adjust the volume, but nothing was working. The sound just kept getting worse. "I'm really sorry, sir," I said, trying to remain calm. "Let me fix this for you. I'm going to put you on a brief hold while I sort this out." I clicked the hold button, but instead of silence, the feedback noise got louder and more distorted. I could hear it through the headphones, and it felt like the whole world was vibrating around me. It was disorienting, and I panicked for a second. I took off the headset and held it at arm's length, trying to figure out what was happening. That's when I noticed something truly horrifying. My computer screen was flashing. I hadn't seen it before, but now it was as if the screen was glitching and showing a weird, distorted version of the call center interface. In my panic, I accidentally hit the mute button on my desk phone, which meant the customer couldn't hear me. I frantically tried to fix it while still holding the headset away from my ears. By this point, I was on the verge of a full-on meltdown. Everything was going wrong. My heart was pounding in my chest. To make matters worse, I accidentally knocked over my water bottle with my elbow. It tipped over and spilled all over the desk. The water splashed onto my keyboard and monitor, causing the screen to flicker more violently. It was like something out of a disaster movie. At that moment, I completely lost my composure. In my attempt to clean up the spill, I managed to knock my coffee cup off the desk too. The hot coffee splashed onto my lap. Now, I was drenched in cold water and hot coffee, and my computer screen was flashing in a way that made it impossible to focus on anything. I was in a full-blown panic. I frantically hit buttons on my keyboard, trying to stop the feedback noise. I was so desperate to fix everything that I didn't realize the customer was still on the line. When I heard his voice again, I almost jumped out of my seat. "Hello? Are you still there?" he asked, sounding even more annoyed. "Why yes, I'm here," I stammered. "Sorry about the noise, sir. I'm trying to fix it. Please hold on." In my frantic state, I clicked the wrong button. Instead of muting my mic, I accidentally switched on my camera. I have no idea how it happened, but suddenly, my webcam feed popped up on the screen, and the customer could see me. To make matters worse, my hair was a mess from the water spill, my face was flushed from the coffee burn, and I was literally sitting in a puddle of water and coffee. I quickly noticed the mistake and scrambled to turn off my camera, but it was too late. The customer had already seen everything. There was no way to undo it. Sir?" I said, my voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for you to see that. Please, just..." There was an awkward silence on the line, and I could hear the customer's breathing. I couldn't tell if he was in shock, confused, or just baffled by the whole thing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Well, I didn't expect this to be part of the service," he said dryly. "But I guess you've got bigger problems than my account. Fix it when you can. I'm hanging up now." And then, he hung up. I sat there in absolute disbelief, looking at the mess around me. My desk was drenched, my clothes were ruined, and I had no idea how I was going to explain any of this. The feedback noise had stopped, the webcam was off, but the damage had been done. I'd somehow managed to combine my worst fears, embarrassment, tech failure, and an accidental webcam reveal, all into one catastrophic moment. I spent the next 20 minutes trying to clean up the mess, muttering curses under my breath. Eventually, I had to take the rest of the day off because I couldn't stop laughing and cringing at what had just happened. To this day, I still don't know what caused the feedback noise or how my webcam got turned on. I don't even know if the customer was serious when he said he'd call back. I guess we'll never know. But one thing's for sure, I'll be triple-checking my webcam and making sure all my tech works before I take another call. It was truly a day I'll never forget. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and accidentally burning down the house. So, a little backstory before I get into this. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I have been together for about 2 years now, and things have been pretty great. We have our moments like any couple, but overall, we really understand each other. She's always been super supportive of me, and I wanted to do something special for her. Our anniversary was coming up, and I thought it would be a nice gesture to surprise her with a home-cooked, candle-lit dinner. You know, really go all out and show her how much she means to me. I'm not a terrible cook, but I'm not exactly Gordon Ramsay either. I can whip up a few decent dishes, but anything more complicated requires a recipe. After a quick search, I decided I would make her favorite, chicken parmesan with spaghetti and a side of garlic bread. It sounded simple enough, and I had seen a few tutorials on YouTube to brush up on my skills. I decided to make the whole thing from scratch. The bread, the sauce, the chicken, everything. I figured this would be the type of thoughtful gesture that would blow her away. And, you know, I wanted to impress her. So, I set a plan to cook it all in the early afternoon, let it cool down, and then reheat it for dinner when she got home. That way, it would be fresh and hot, and I'd have plenty of time to set up a nice atmosphere. I went to the grocery store and picked up everything I would need. chicken breasts, spaghetti, garlic, bread, tomatoes, cheese, olive oil, and, of course, some candles for the ambience. I wasn't sure how to arrange them yet, but I figured I'd figure that part out later. I also grabbed a bottle of wine. I'm not a huge wine connoisseur, but I knew she liked red wine, so I grabbed one with a fancy label. Once I got home, I put on some music to set the mood, and I got to work. The first step was the sauce, so I chopped the garlic, diced the tomatoes, and threw them into a pot to simmer. Everything was going smoothly so far. Then, I moved on to the chicken. I breaded the chicken breasts, got the oil heated up in the pan, and tossed them in to cook. They started to sizzle, and I felt pretty proud of myself. This was actually going better than I expected. As the chicken cooked, I prepared the garlic bread. I thought I'd go above and beyond and add some butter and herbs to the bread to give it a little extra kick. I put the bread in the oven, set the timer, and turned my attention back to the chicken. Now, here's where things started to go south. The oil in the pan was getting a little too hot, but I didn't realize it because the music was pretty loud, and I was getting caught up in the cooking. The garlic bread was starting to smell really good, and I thought, hey, I'm doing great here. I flipped the chicken to cook the other side, and that's when I saw it, a small puff of smoke coming from the pan. At first, I thought it was just a bit of steam, but then I saw the flames. One of the chicken breasts had caught fire. I immediately panicked and tried to turn the heat down, but I wasn't quick enough. The flames grew, and soon it wasn't just the chicken, the oil in the pan was blazing. I grabbed the nearest utensil, a spatula, and tried to swat at the flames, but that only made them worse. In a blind panic, I rushed to the sink to grab a wet towel, thinking I could put out the fire. But of course, that was the worst possible thing to do. The towel only made the fire spread, and now there was a fireball in the kitchen. My mind was racing. I was thinking, what do I do? What do I do? I grabbed the fire extinguisher, but in my haste, I somehow knocked it over and spilled it on the floor. Great. Now I had a mess of fire extinguisher powder all over the kitchen floor and a raging fire on the stove. I turned the stove off, but the fire wasn't going out. It felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. I looked at the clock. Sarah would be home in less than an hour. I had no choice. I had to call 911. I dialed the number, my hands shaking, and managed to explain what had happened. They told me to get out of the house immediately and wait outside. So, I grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys, ran outside, and stood on the porch in my socks, waiting for the fire department. As I stood there, completely frozen with embarrassment and dread, I could see smoke pouring out of the kitchen window. It wasn't just a small fire anymore, it was full-on chaos. I could hear sirens in the distance, and my stomach dropped. I didn't even know what to do anymore. Within minutes, the fire trucks arrived, and firefighters rushed inside. I watched from the porch, hoping they could save something, anything. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged, looking relieved. They assured me that the fire had been contained, and no one was hurt, but the kitchen was a total loss. The flames had scorched the walls, the cabinets, and the ceiling. My romantic dinner? Gone. My kitchen? Gone. By the time Sarah got home, the fire department had packed up and left, but the house was still smoky. I was standing in the front yard, covered in fire extinguisher powder and smelling like a mixture of burnt chicken and charred wood. Sarah pulled up and immediately noticed the fire trucks and the mess. She looked terrified and asked if I was okay. I had no idea how to explain what had happened. I started with, so, I tried to cook us a nice dinner, and that's when I just broke down. I felt so embarrassed and ashamed. The entire evening that I had planned was ruined. She tried to comfort me, but there wasn't much that could be said. I had managed to destroy our kitchen and completely ruin the surprise. After everything calmed down, we ended up ordering pizza and sitting on the porch, talking about what happened. I couldn't stop apologizing, but she reassured me that she appreciated the thought and effort. I was still mortified, though. That's when she said something that really stuck with me. I would have been just as happy with a simple dinner, you know. It's the thought that counts. In the end, we had a good laugh about it, though I'm still not sure if I'll ever cook again. I guess the lesson here is, when in doubt, don't try to make a fancy meal unless you really know what you're doing. And definitely don't try to surprise your girlfriend with fire. At least I can say I learned the hard way. TLDR, tried to cook a romantic dinner for my girlfriend, ended up burning down the kitchen and calling 911. Still managed to salvage the night with pizza, but I'll never live this one down. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic proposal and ending up with a ruined evening, a fire alarm, and an ER visit. I had been planning the perfect proposal for months. It wasn't supposed to be a huge public event, no skywriting or flash mobs for me. No, I wanted something personal, something intimate, and most importantly, I wanted it to be a surprise. After weeks of obsessing over the details, I thought I had everything in place. I was wrong. It all started with the dinner. I decided to cook a fancy meal at home. I'd spent the entire day preparing, getting all the ingredients, setting the mood with candles, soft music, and even a bottle of wine that I'd been saving for a special occasion. The kitchen was practically a war zone by the time I finished making everything from scratch: pasta, chicken, roasted vegetables, the whole 9 yards. I knew it was a bit ambitious, but I wanted to knock it out of the park. So, I spent hours getting the meal just right, timing it so it would be ready when she got home from work. The plan was to have dinner, share some wine, and then, after the meal, I would drop to one knee and propose. I thought it would be a perfect moment, simple, romantic, and entirely my style. But then, of course, everything went sideways. The first problem came when I was just finishing up cooking. I had the pasta boiling, the chicken on the stove, and the vegetables in the oven. The recipe called for me to let the chicken sear on medium-high heat for a few minutes, which I did, for a bit too long. I got distracted by checking the candles on the table and started fiddling with the wine glasses. By the time I looked back, the chicken was, well, let's just say it wasn't chicken anymore. It was charcoal. At this point, panic set in. I couldn't serve her burnt chicken. It wasn't like I could just pretend that it was part of the charm of the meal, right? So, I did what any rational person would do. I decided to go for a last-minute grilled cheese sandwich as a backup. It wasn't the grand dinner I'd planned, but at least it was edible. I tried to plate it like I hadn't just burned a whole chicken and pretended it was all part of my rustic cooking style. No one would notice, right? But then, the second problem arose, the fire alarm. The grilled cheese sandwich was fine, but apparently, I wasn't quite done with setting things on fire yet. In my hurry to salvage the night, I had left the burner on high for far too long while I ran around looking for a spatula. That was when the smell hit me, something was burning. I ran back to the stove, only to find a small flame flickering around the edges of the pan. I panicked. The fire alarm blared in the background, loud enough to make me think that the whole building might catch fire. I grabbed a dish towel, tried to put out the fire by flailing it around, but only succeeded in making things worse. At this point, the fire alarm was so deafening I could barely think. And sure enough, as if on cue, my girlfriend called to say she was on her way home. Perfect timing, right? In my flustered state, I grabbed the fire extinguisher. Yes, I had one, because, you know, safety first, but in my panic, I couldn't figure out how to use it properly. I pulled the pin, but instead of aiming it at the fire, I sprayed a plume of foam all over the kitchen. It wasn't just the stove anymore, the entire kitchen now had a thick coating of fire extinguisher foam. The smell of burnt cheese and chemical foam combined into an aroma that can only be described as disaster. By the time my girlfriend arrived, I was standing there, holding a half-burnt grilled cheese sandwich, surrounded by foam, with the fire alarm still screaming in the background. She stood in the doorway for a moment, completely stunned. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, concern, and then, of course, laughter. She laughed so hard, I was starting to wonder if this was still the woman I'd been dating for the past 2 years. Are you okay? She asked, still holding her stomach from laughing. No, not really, I said. I was trying to cook dinner and then, well, I tried to put out a fire with a dish towel. Why do you have foam all over the kitchen? I sighed. Long story short, I tried to use the fire extinguisher, but I may have sprayed the entire room instead of the fire. Okay, she said, her voice still filled with disbelief. And what's with the sandwich? I looked at the sad, burnt remains of what was supposed to be a grilled cheese masterpiece. That is dinner. She just shook her head, laughing more. But I wasn't ready to give up. I told her I had something else planned, that I still had the proposal. I was determined to salvage this evening somehow, even though everything was already in shambles. I led her to the living room, where I had set up the candles and a small box with the engagement ring inside. My plan was to sit down, have a nice talk, and then pop the question. The romantic moment had to happen, damn it. As we sat down, I felt my heart start to race. She was still smiling at the absurdity of the evening, but I could tell she was happy, and that gave me the courage to keep going. I took a deep breath, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the ring box. But as I did, I accidentally knocked over one of the candles. It tipped over and spilled hot wax all over the coffee table. At this point, I had no idea if I should laugh or cry. She stared at the wax pooling on the table, then at me. Are you okay? You're starting to look a little unhinged. And that's when I realized how bad it had gotten. The fire alarm was still going off, the kitchen looked like a crime scene, I had a sandwich that didn't resemble food, and now the coffee table was covered in wax. I could feel the weight of my failure. But I didn't give up. I went ahead with the proposal anyway. I told her I loved her more than anything and that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. I dropped to one knee, ignoring the slight burn I'd gotten from the wax, and held out the ring. To her credit, she didn't laugh or make fun of me. She was just as stunned as I was, but then, after a pause, she said, "Of course, yes." That was the moment I realized I didn't need everything to be perfect. I didn't need the fancy dinner or the flawless proposal. All I really needed was her. So, despite all the chaos, despite the fire alarm, the burnt food, and the foam-covered kitchen, we ended up getting engaged. And even though the evening was a total disaster in every way possible, it was one of the best nights of my life. I still don't think I'll ever cook for her again, though. So, I was feeling pretty good about myself the other day. I had just finished an intense week of work, wrapped up some personal projects, and finally had a whole weekend to just relax and enjoy some me time. My plan was simple: get some rest, catch up on a few TV shows I'd been ignoring, and maybe treat myself to a nice meal. Naturally, I had this urge to take it up a notch and do something a bit more exciting for dinner. I wasn't just going to order pizza or grab a burger like usual, I was in the mood to treat myself, right? I thought about it for a second and remembered that there was a place nearby that made some of the best sushi in town. I hadn't had sushi in a while, and it just felt like the kind of food that would elevate my self-care weekend to the next level. So, I decided to go all out and order a full sushi platter, some miso soup, edamame, and a couple of rolls I had been wanting to try for a while. Feeling pretty smug about my culinary choice, I made the order and settled in, ready to enjoy my evening. I was looking forward to the sushi more than anything else. I've always been a fan of Japanese food, but sushi in particular has a special place in my heart. It's the kind of thing I can sit down with, enjoy slowly, and feel like I'm living my best life. Now, here's where things went sideways. About 45 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I walked over to the door, opened it, and the delivery driver handed me a bag with my sushi order. I thanked him, handed him a tip, and closed the door, feeling like I had made a solid life choice. Everything was in place, time to eat. I set the food up on my coffee table, put on the show I had been meaning to watch, and grabbed a pair of chopsticks. I wasn't even hungry, but the anticipation of eating sushi made me excited. I started with a couple pieces of sashimi, just to get the flavor going, then moved on to the rolls. The first roll was good, the second one was even better, and I was really starting to feel like I had made a great decision. But, after about 10 minutes of non-stop sushi enjoyment, something began to feel off. At first, it was a slight feeling in my stomach, just a little gurgle, like I needed to take a break. But I figured it was nothing. I've eaten sushi plenty of times before, so I brushed it off. Maybe I was just getting full. But then the gurgling started getting a little more intense. My stomach began to feel bloated, and I could feel the pressure building. It wasn't painful yet, but it was definitely uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it, but after a few more bites, I felt like I might actually explode. I decided to take a quick break. I stood up, stretched, and thought about maybe stepping outside to get some fresh air. But before I could even move, my stomach made this weird, violent churn, and the discomfort went from mild to something I couldn't ignore. It felt like all the sushi I had just eaten was suddenly a brick in my stomach, and it was all moving in ways it wasn't supposed to. I realized I had probably eaten too much too quickly, but I didn't want to accept that just yet. Maybe it would pass. Big mistake. Within 5 minutes, my stomach went from bloated and uncomfortable to an outright emergency. I rushed to the bathroom, hoping I could just burp or pass gas to relieve the pressure. But as soon as I sat down on the toilet, I knew something was seriously wrong. The gurgling in my stomach wasn't a friendly sound anymore. It was as if my intestines were conspiring against me, and I could feel the sushi moving through my digestive tract in a way that wasn't natural. And then it happened. I couldn't stop it. My body gave out and I exploded. There's no other way to describe it, an explosive, gut-wrenching, borderline violent reaction to the sushi. It was one of those moments where you immediately regret every life decision that led you to this point. I thought it was over, but the worst part was yet to come. As I sat there, literally paralyzed in shock from the intensity of what had just happened, I realized that the sushi wasn't done with me. The wave of nausea hit me almost instantly. My stomach was churning, and I was fighting with every ounce of my being to not lose control of everything in my body. I didn't want to believe it, but my body was betraying me in ways that were too dramatic to ignore. I quickly reached for the nearest thing I could find, which happened to be the small trash can in the bathroom. By the time I reached it, I couldn't hold it anymore. And the sushi, which had been so delicious and exciting just an hour ago, was now the source of my misery. I threw up the entire meal. All of it. The rolls, the sashimi, the miso soup. Everything came right back up in one big surge. It was like a scene from a horror movie. I was sitting on the toilet, throwing up in the trash can, just praying that I wouldn't die in this bathroom alone. But no. My ordeal was far from over. By the time I thought I had it all out, my stomach was still doing flips, and I felt even worse than I had before. I had no idea what went wrong. I had eaten sushi plenty of times in the past, but for some reason, my body was not tolerating it this time. I spent the next hour sitting in the bathroom, trying to calm my stomach down. I couldn't even bring myself to leave. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I felt well enough to crawl into bed. My stomach was still upset, but I couldn't bear to think about food. All I wanted was to go to sleep and forget this whole nightmare ever happened. Needless to say, my me time was ruined. The weekend I had planned to spend relaxing, watching TV, and treating myself to delicious sushi turned into an absolute disaster. I spent the next few days recovering and vowing never to overeat sushi again. Moral of the story: never ever trust your body when it tells you that you're good to keep eating sushi, especially when you're already feeling a bit off. And always listen to your gut, literally and figuratively. So, I was always the type of person who prided themselves on being organized. I had a routine, a carefully planned schedule, and I never missed deadlines. It wasn't about being a perfectionist, it was just the way I liked things to go. Life was smoother when everything had its place, and I'd found a way to make my work-life balance manageable. But sometimes, life has a way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect it. The day everything went sideways started off like any other. I woke up early, had my coffee, and settled into my home office to start working on some important presentations for the following week. Everything was going fine until my boss, who works from the corporate office in another city, called me around noon. "Hey, I need you to handle an emergency situation. You're the only one I trust with this. Can you go pick up the company's client gift for the meeting on Friday? It's a high-profile client, and this gift has to be perfect," he said, sounding stressed. No problem, I thought. I've got this. I was already on top of my schedule, so I figured I could easily make time to go get the gift. My boss gave me the name of the store, a high-end boutique a few miles from my house, and I promised to be there in 30 minutes. I even jokingly said, "I'll make sure it's the best gift they've ever received." I hung up and quickly grabbed my keys. I'm usually pretty meticulous about running errands, but this time I felt a little more confident than usual. After all, I had an emergency to attend to, and I didn't want to disappoint my boss. As I walked out the door, I glanced at my phone again. The boutique's name was something fancy that I didn't recognize, but it didn't seem like a big deal. I figured I could just trust my GPS to get me there quickly. I pulled into the parking lot of the store in record time. It was a nice part of town, and the boutique itself looked like the kind of place that catered to people with a lot of disposable income, rich, shiny windows, elegant decor, and all that. I felt slightly out of place walking in, but I knew my boss wouldn't have given me the task if it wasn't important. When I entered the store, I was immediately greeted by a sales associate in a suit who asked how they could assist me. I explained I was picking up a gift that had been pre-ordered, and the associate smiled and nodded, leading me to the back of the store. The store was filled with high-end perfumes, expensive-looking jewelry, and other luxurious items. "Right this way," the associate said, walking me down a narrow aisle between glass displays. We stopped at a glass counter with a few exclusive-looking boxes. "Here it is," they said, unlocking a display case and pulling out a velvet box. I recognized it immediately as the type of gift my boss would order. "This is the one your boss picked out." Inside the box was an ornate, custom-made fountain pen, gold-plated with intricate engraving, probably worth thousands of dollars. I thought to myself, wow, this is definitely going to impress the client. I didn't ask many questions about the price tag. In fact, I was more concerned with the timing. I had other tasks to do, and I didn't want to keep my boss waiting. I thanked the sales associate, paid for the pen, which had already been paid for in advance, and went on my way, feeling like a hero for getting this important task done so quickly. But as I drove back to my home office, I realized something strange. There had been no mention of an engraving. My boss had told me it was custom-made, but they didn't say anything about a personalized message. Maybe it's just one of those standard pens they sell in this boutique, I thought. It's a bit unusual, but who am I to question what my boss ordered? When I got home, I took the gift inside and placed it on my desk. I decided to check the box one last time before wrapping it up. That's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. The engraving on the pen wasn't some fancy logo or corporate branding, as I'd expected. Instead, it read, "To my beloved Ashley, for our love, forever and always, Derek." I blinked. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had just bought a fountain pen that had been engraved with a romantic message from one lover to another. And it wasn't even a generic with love message. This was personal. It was a love letter. I panicked. I immediately pulled out my phone to call my boss, but the seconds felt like hours. What was I supposed to do? I had no idea what to say. The situation was completely surreal. After a few moments of sheer terror, I managed to get in touch with my boss. I was stammering, trying to explain what had happened. "So, I just picked up the gift, and I think there's been a mistake. The pen, it's, engraved with the wrong message. It says something about someone named Ashley, and love, Anne." "Derek," there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Wait, what?" my boss finally asked. Are you telling me that the pen has a romantic message engraved on it? Are you sure? I wasn't sure what was happening anymore. My brain was spinning. But I was absolutely sure about one thing: the pen I had in front of me wasn't the right one. My boss seemed to take the news surprisingly well. Okay, no big deal. It's just a mix-up. I'll have someone at the store sort it out for you. You don't have to go back there, I'll handle it. I felt a bit of relief at that, though I still couldn't shake the image of that romantic inscription. I'm really sorry, I don't know how this happened, I said. He laughed a little on the other end of the line. Well, now I've got a new life goal: make sure you never get caught up in a love triangle over a fountain pen. I still don't know exactly how the mix-up happened, but in the end, the gift was replaced with the correct one, a custom-engraved pen with the company logo and a more professional message. But the experience left me shaken. I had never before been involved in such a ridiculous situation. The best part? It wasn't even my fault. Still, I'm never going to live down the image of a fountain pen meant for a business client being engraved with a love note from Derek to Ashley. Lesson learned: always double-check everything, and if you're ever tasked with picking up a gift from a boutique, make sure it doesn't come with any unexpected romantic messages. I haven't heard the end of it from my coworkers, though. Now every time they see me, they call me the Pen Cupid. I don't think that nickname is going away anytime soon. End of story. TIFU: by accidentally sending my best friend a video of me crying and eating an entire pizza while watching The Bachelor. So, a little background: I have this best friend, Jenna, who I've known since freshman year of college. We bonded over our mutual love for trashy reality TV, pizza, and the fact that we both have a knack for turning simple hangouts into full-blown emotional support sessions. She's been my go-to person for pretty much everything, whether it's celebrating good news or comforting me after an awful date. Now, to the story. A couple of weeks ago, I was having what can only be described as a bad week. Work had been stressful, my gym routine was a joke, and my social life had been practically non-existent since I'd gotten out of a not-so-great relationship. I was feeling down in the dumps, and to make things worse, the weather was terrible: gray skies, constant drizzle. Just the kind of day when all you want to do is curl up in bed, binge-watch reality TV, and drown your sorrows in an entire pizza. Well, that's exactly what I did. I picked up the phone and ordered my usual, an extra-large margarita pizza with a side of garlic knots, and settled in for a long night of feeling sorry for myself. The Bachelor was on that night, and I figured it would at least provide some mindless distraction. I'm not one to cry over reality shows, but that night, I don't know what happened. I think it was the combination of too much cheese, a deep feeling of loneliness, and the absolute absurdity of the contestants on TV. Before I knew it, I was sobbing uncontrollably, a slice of pizza in hand, alternating between biting into it and wiping away tears. Now, you might think I'd stop at some point, but no. I kept going. I was watching the drama unfold on screen, crying, eating, and kind of laughing at myself all at the same time. Honestly, I looked like a mess, but I was too deep into my emotional meltdown to care. I pulled out my phone, opened up the camera, and decided to send Jenna a message. I often vent to her about how ridiculous my life feels sometimes, and I thought I could lighten the mood by sending her a quick, funny video of me in the middle of this emotional breakdown. I figured she'd appreciate the humor, and it'd probably cheer me up. So, I hit record. I made a dramatic face, wiped my tear-streaked cheeks, and tried to make a joke about how this is my life now, crying and eating pizza while watching reality TV. In my delirium, I even added a small dramatic sob for effect. I finished the video, laughing at myself, and sent it without thinking twice. The problem? I accidentally sent it to the wrong person. Instead of sending it to Jenna, I had somehow sent it to my ex, Brad. Now, just to give you some context, Brad and I had broken up a few months ago after a long relationship. It was amicable, but it was also still a little raw. We'd been texting here and there, mostly talking about mundane stuff like how our mutual friends were doing or asking about work, but it was nothing more than casual conversation. We hadn't talked in any meaningful way in a while, and I definitely wasn't in any headspace to have a deep conversation with him. When I realized what had happened, my stomach dropped. I immediately grabbed my phone, hoping to undo the damage by deleting the message. Unfortunately, Brad had already seen it. I could see the little red indicator under the message, confirming my worst fear. I froze for a second, then went into full-on panic mode. What had I just sent him? A video of me crying like a baby, eating pizza like a depressed mess. I could only imagine the look on his face when he watched it. There was no denying it was, well, embarrassing. I mean, I had literally just bared my soul to him in the most cringeworthy, self-deprecating way possible. I spent a solid 10 minutes trying to come up with an explanation. Should I apologize? Should I just ignore it and pretend it never happened? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no good way to salvage the situation. I had just sent him a video of me sobbing and stuffing my face with food. There was no coming back from that. Before I could even decide what to do next, my phone buzzed. Brad had responded. Hey, are you okay? That video was something else. I stared at the text for what felt like an eternity. Was he judging me? Did he think I was pathetic? I wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. I quickly typed back, trying to play it cool. Yeah, sorry about that. I got a little carried away. Just had a bad day, you know? I hit send, hoping to somehow make the whole thing seem less insane. A few moments later, he replied. It's cool, I get it. I mean, we all have those days. But, I wasn't expecting that much emotion. You've got to stop watching those shows, though. They're clearly messing with your head. I laughed awkwardly and typed back, yeah, I'll try to keep my breakdowns to a minimum. Sorry for the randomness. The rest of the conversation went fairly uneventfully after that. Brad didn't seem weirded out or put off by the video, but it was obvious that he didn't quite know what to make of it. We finished chatting, and I immediately closed my phone and tried to distract myself with more reality TV to shake off the awkwardness. The next day, Jenna finally responded to the video. She sent a message that said, LMAO, okay, I've never seen you this emotional over pizza. You need a better hobby. I laughed and replied, yeah, but it's my rock bottom moment. You might see me on a reality show someday. I can't believe I sent that video to Brad, of all people. If I had to choose between him and Jenna, I would have much rather sent it to her. She's seen me at my worst 100 times, and she wouldn't have batted an eye. But Brad? Well, I'm not sure what he thinks of me now. I guess we'll see if he ever brings it up again. So, moral of the story, never send a video of yourself crying and eating pizza while watching The Bachelor to anyone unless you're absolutely sure it's the right person. And maybe consider turning off your phone's camera before you let your emotions get the best of you. Now, I'm just hoping Brad doesn't start a crying pizza girl meme or something. It all started on a Monday morning. I woke up groggy, late for work, and with a massive hangover. The night before had been one of those spontaneous bar-hopping sessions with friends where we had way too many shots of tequila, and I didn't even remember how I got home. The only thing I knew for sure was that my head was pounding, and I was in no mood to go to work. But, like the responsible adult I'm still pretending to be, I dragged myself out of bed, threw on some clothes, and set off to the office. I live in a small apartment in the city, and my commute is about 30 minutes, which gives me just enough time to mentally prepare myself for the chaos that is work. As I sat on the subway, I pulled out my phone, scrolled through emails, and saw an alarming one from my boss. It was a simple subject line, urgent, review the presentation before the meeting. The email had been sent at 2 a.m. I stared at the email for a good few seconds, trying to process the fact that my boss had probably been up all night working on something that involved me. I immediately opened the attachment to see a PowerPoint presentation for a big client meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. that morning. The presentation was an absolute disaster. It was all over the place, no consistent formatting, terrible font choices, inconsistent slide transitions, and the content was messy at best. I could already hear my boss's voice in my head. "Why didn't you catch this earlier? What's wrong with you?" But here's the catch, I was the one who was supposed to prepare the presentation. The night before, my boss had asked me to put together some slides for a meeting we had this morning. But instead of doing it, I procrastinated and made the brilliant decision to go out and drink tequila with friends instead. I panicked. There was no way I could fix all of this in 30 minutes. I couldn't even think straight with this hangover, and the presentation looked like it was assembled by a drunk monkey. But the client was important, and this meeting could make or break my career. I could already feel the sweat forming on my brow as I thought of the awkward silence that would fill the room when my boss and I presented this train wreck. So I did the only thing that seemed logical in my state. I started making quick changes. I rushed through editing the slides, rewording sentences, changing fonts, and rearranging things without even thinking about it. At one point, I literally slapped in a random stock photo of a smiling business person just to fill a space that was awkwardly blank. I wasn't even sure if the image was relevant to the topic, but it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. By the time the subway reached my stop, I had somewhat fixed the presentation. It was far from perfect, but I convinced myself that it was presentable enough to get through the meeting. I sent the presentation off to my boss with a quick apology. "Sorry about the late-night email, I tried to fix it as best as I could." Then I bolted out of the subway and hurried to the office. I arrived at work a few minutes late, but no one seemed to notice. The office was buzzing with activity, and everyone was scrambling to get ready for the big client meeting. I walked to my desk, trying to act casual, as if I didn't just almost ruin the entire company's future. My boss was pacing around the office, and I could hear him grumbling to someone about last-minute preparations. He was already in full-on boss mode, so I kept my distance, hoping he wouldn't notice me. About 15 minutes later, I was sitting in the conference room, nervously tapping my pen on the table. I had a cup of coffee in front of me, but I barely even touched it because my stomach was in knots. The client was running late, which gave us a bit more time to prepare. I stared at the clock, counting down the minutes until the meeting began, when I noticed my boss walking toward me. He didn't look angry, but he also didn't look happy. "Hey, my name, thanks for fixing the presentation. I just looked through it, and you did a good job. But, one thing," he said, his voice trailing off. My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was looking through the slides, and, well, you might want to take a look at this one slide here." He pointed to the slide that I had inserted the random stock photo of a smiling business person. My stomach dropped. The photo was of a man who was wearing a suit and standing in front of a boardroom table. It was generic enough, but the more I stared at it, the more I realized that there was something incredibly wrong with it. I squinted at the image. My boss's face slowly turned pale as he also realized what I hadn't noticed in my rushed edits. The man in the photo was not a generic stock photo of a businessperson. He was wearing a suit, yes, but his expression was eerily familiar. The more I looked, the more I recognized the features. His face, his eyes, even the way he was standing, it was my ex-boyfriend. I froze. I had no idea how the hell a stock photo with my ex-boyfriend ended up in the presentation. I hadn't even noticed it when I hastily inserted it that morning. There was no way this was a coincidence. This wasn't some random generic image, this was him. I tried to cover my tracks quickly. "Oh, no, that's a stock photo of a well-known businessperson, I think. I'll fix it. It's not a big deal, right?" My boss raised an eyebrow. "It's a little weird. You sure you don't know him?" I swallowed hard. "No. Absolutely not. Let me fix it." I darted out of the conference room, my mind racing. How could this have happened? What were the chances of me randomly selecting a stock photo of my ex for a professional presentation? It was the most bizarre and embarrassing thing that had ever happened to me. I quickly found another image and replaced the one with my ex, but the damage had already been done. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. The meeting began, and thankfully, the client didn't seem to notice the weird stock photo incident. But I could hardly concentrate, and I could feel the weight of my boss's scrutiny. He didn't say anything about the photo after that, but I could tell it had made him uncomfortable. After the meeting ended, I received a message from my boss saying, "We're going to need to have a talk later. Not about the photo, but about the way you handled the presentation. You need to be more careful next time." I responded with a nervous of course. "I'll be more careful." I don't think I've ever been more mortified in my life. I'm still not sure how the hell my ex's photo made its way into a presentation, but I'm never drinking tequila the night before an important work project again. Or ever again, really. TIFU by accidentally becoming a meme at my best friend's wedding. So, this all started a few months ago when my best friend Mark got engaged to his longtime girlfriend, Sarah. They've been dating for over 7 years, and when Mark popped the question, it wasn't exactly a surprise. Their relationship has been one of those that everyone just kind of assumed was leading to marriage, no one had doubts. Anyway, as the best man, I had one major responsibility: give a speech at the wedding. Easy enough, right? I've known Mark my whole life, and I was definitely prepared to embarrass him a little bit, maybe tell a funny story or two from high school. The wedding itself was beautiful. It was at a pretty upscale venue in a nice part of town. Sarah looked stunning in her wedding dress, and Mark, well, he looked like a deer in headlights. Classic Mark. The ceremony was moving, the vows were tear-jerking, and honestly, I had no complaints. Things were going smoothly, and I was feeling good about giving my speech later on in the evening. So, dinner was served, drinks were flowing, and by the time it was my turn to get up and say something, everyone was in high spirits. I'd spent a few hours writing the speech, tweaking it to be just the right amount of sentimental and funny. I was all set. Or so I thought. I stood up, glass in hand, and I cleared my throat. The crowd quieted down, and I started off with a light joke, which got a decent laugh. Mark was sitting at the front table with Sarah, trying to suppress his grin. I figured I was off to a good start. Things were going great. I told a funny story about how Mark once tried to cook dinner for Sarah and ended up setting off the smoke alarm, which turned into a mini fire department rescue mission. People were laughing, I was feeling good, the whole vibe was upbeat. I even dropped a couple of touching lines about how I admired their relationship, how perfect they were for each other, and how I couldn't have asked for a better best friend. Then came the part where I had planned to go a little deeper. I decided to share a more personal anecdote, something that not only showcased how much Mark meant to me but also how his love for Sarah was truly special. The idea was to make everyone feel all warm and fuzzy inside. You know, the type of moment that brings tears to your eyes and makes you want to hug everyone in the room. Here's where things went downhill. I was telling the story about the time when Mark called me in the middle of the night, sounding totally distraught. Sarah had just moved to another city for her job, and Mark was dealing with a weird mix of missing her and being proud of her, but also feeling a little jealous. We've all been there, right? Anyway, I started narrating how Mark told me he had a dream where he and Sarah had grown apart and how he was scared that their relationship wouldn't survive the long-distance thing. It was a heartfelt moment, and I was emphasizing how much he cared for her, how he was trying to be the best partner he could be. I was fully invested in the moment, speaking from the heart. But as I was getting into the details of the story, I made a fatal mistake. My mouth got ahead of my brain, and I said something along the lines of, he was so afraid of losing Sarah that he actually told me, and then I said it. I said it without thinking. He said that if he ever lost Sarah, he would probably just give up on love altogether. He would be one of those sad, lonely guys who just sits at home watching Netflix and eating takeout every night. Like, seriously, he would probably turn into a meme. I didn't realize what I had just done. The room went silent for a moment, and then there was this awkward giggle. I could feel the tension, but I brushed it off, thinking, hey, it was just a joke. Mark's face, however, turned bright red, and Sarah, sitting next to him, looked completely confused. I quickly tried to backtrack, saying something like, no, that's not what I meant. I just meant, he cares so much about you, Sarah, that the idea of losing you was just unbearable to him. But the damage was done. Somewhere in the room, someone had pulled out their phone and started recording. I didn't realize it at the time, but a few minutes after the speech, one of Mark's cousins came up to me and said, dude, you just became a meme. I had no idea what he meant, but when I checked my phone, I saw it. A video of my speech had already been uploaded to the internet. The clip was titled, When Your Best Man Accidentally Calls You a Sad, Netflix-Obsessed Meme. It was the most embarrassing thing that had ever happened to me. People from the wedding, people I didn't even know, were sharing the video. Mark was texting me, furious, while his cousins were sending me screenshots of random strangers on Twitter cracking jokes about it. The worst part was when Mark's mom called me later that evening, asking if I'd been joking about Mark becoming a sad meme. She was concerned that I had somehow ruined the tone of the night. By the end of the wedding, the entire thing had blown up. My slip-up turned into an ongoing joke at the reception, with people laughing every time someone mentioned Netflix or memes. Mark gave me a don't ever bring this up again look, but his friends were teasing him about it for weeks afterward. I wasn't invited to the couple's brunch the next morning, and when I asked Mark why, he said, maybe we should just lay low for a while. Now, months later, I'm still getting tagged in memes about it. The worst part? I'm actually kind of recognized for it now. I've been sent the meme at least a dozen times from random people I don't even know. People are joking about how I'm a meme-making machine, and some even refer to me as sad Netflix guy. Mark and I are still friends, obviously, but every time we talk, I can feel a little tension. He'll send me a text like, hey, do you still watch Netflix, or are you out there making memes? And I'll just reply with something like, yeah, just trying to keep it together. It's been months, but I'm pretty sure he'll never let me live it down. Anyway, my advice to anyone giving a wedding speech, just stick to the basics. No deep, philosophical moments. No self-reflection. And for the love of God, don't joke about becoming a meme. You might just become one for real. TLDR, I gave a wedding speech about my best friend and his love for his now wife, accidentally made a joke about him becoming a sad, Netflix-obsessed meme, and now I'm the star of an internet meme that everyone at the wedding still won't let me forget. TIFU by accidentally making my boss think I was a total idiot at work, and it might cost me my job. So, here's how it all started. I've been working as a project manager at a mid-sized tech company for the past 2 years. The job is great, nice colleagues, decent pay, and the work is interesting. But like any office environment, there's always a certain level of office politics to navigate. I'm not one to get involved in the drama, and for the most part, I've kept my head down, done my job, and been generally well liked. But everything changed last Tuesday. I was assigned a fairly important presentation for a client pitch that was coming up. This wasn't just any client. The company had been eyeing this particular client for months, and it was my job to coordinate the pitch with the sales and tech teams. To make matters more complicated, my boss, Rachel, had been hovering around the office a lot more recently, presumably due to the pressure of securing this deal. She's a perfectionist and very hands-on, which, while beneficial most of the time, was stressing me out because I felt like I was being micromanaged. The morning of the presentation, I arrived at the office early, ready to impress. I had everything prepped, slides, talking points, the budget proposal, and even a demo that I was going to show. Everything was in place, and I felt confident. But Rachel had other plans. As I was about to leave for the meeting, she stopped me and told me there was one more thing I needed to do. You need to add the financial forecast numbers to the last slide. At this point, I was already running late. I'd been working on the pitch for weeks and had missed a few lunches to perfect it, but I hadn't finalized the forecast numbers. Sure, no problem, I said, knowing I could figure something out. After all, I had all the other slides polished, and adding a quick financial summary should be easy, right? Big mistake. I rushed back to my desk and opened up the document where I had been tracking the numbers. The thing is, I'm not exactly a finance person, I'm more into the project management side of things. So, when Rachel had said financial forecast, I should have asked for clarification. But I didn't. I just assumed it was a simple set of numbers that were probably available somewhere in our shared folder. I glanced through the files on my computer and found a spreadsheet that seemed to have what I needed. I copied and pasted the numbers from the spreadsheet onto the last slide and made a few adjustments to the formatting. It looked fine. I didn't double-check it because, frankly, I was already running out of time. My heart was racing because Rachel was waiting for me, and the presentation was about to start. I didn't even have time to proofread everything properly. I grabbed my bag, rushed to the conference room, and set up the presentation. As soon as I saw the clients seated, I started my spiel. Everything was going well, until we got to the financial forecast slide. I clicked through to the last slide and began explaining the numbers I'd borrowed from the spreadsheet. The room fell silent. Everyone was staring at me like I had just shown up in a clown suit. My stomach dropped. I quickly scanned the slide and realized what had happened. I had pasted the wrong numbers. The numbers on the slide weren't from the current forecast for the pitch. They were from a completely different project, one we'd worked on months ago, which had absolutely no relevance to this client's pitch. To make matters worse, the numbers didn't even make sense in this context. They were from an entirely different industry. The clients looked confused and even exchanged glances. My boss, Rachel, was now glaring at me from across the room. I panicked. I fumbled with my laptop, trying to pull up the correct numbers on the fly, but the damage was done. Rachel didn't say anything during the rest of the presentation, but I could feel her disappointment radiating through the room. By the time the meeting ended, the clients were polite but cold, and I knew we weren't going to close that deal. As soon as the meeting ended, Rachel pulled me aside. Her face was red with frustration. "What the hell was that?" she asked, barely containing her anger. I tried to explain that I'd grabbed the wrong numbers, but she wasn't having it. "You should have double-checked everything. This was a major presentation, and you messed it up in front of the clients. You've got to be more careful. This is your responsibility." I felt like an idiot. The worst part was, I knew she was right. It was completely my fault. I should have asked for clarification about the numbers and double-checked everything before walking into that room. I just wanted to get it over with, and in doing so, I had ruined what could have been a very important deal for the company. The fallout didn't stop there. The next day, I was called into HR. I had to explain my actions, and I was formally reprimanded. It wasn't enough to get me fired, but I definitely got a warning. They also told me that the pitch had left a negative impression on the clients, and it might affect future business with them. Rachel wasn't as cold the next day, but I could tell she was still disappointed. She didn't openly berate me again, but there was a noticeable distance between us. For the next few days, I felt like everyone at work was talking about it behind my back. My colleagues tried to act normal, but I could sense the awkwardness in the air. A week later, I found out that the client had gone with another company. No surprise there. I had ruined the pitch, and now I had to live with that. Looking back, I realize how stupid I was. I should have asked questions. I should have taken the time to double-check everything, no matter how rushed I felt. I had been so focused on the presentation that I didn't pay attention to the details. I learned the hard way that in the business world, those details are what matter the most. So yeah, TIFU by screwing up a major client pitch and nearly losing my job because I couldn't be bothered to double-check some numbers. It was a wake-up call, and I'll never make that mistake again. But for now, I'm just praying that I can rebuild my reputation at work before it's too late. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.